Well, greetings. Pastor Eric here, coming to you from the church kitchen, where all the important things happen at church in terms of fellowship and preparation for being together. It is our Sunday preview when we're looking ahead to the 15th of January. We're looking at King Solomon in the story, chapter 13, the king who had it all. The king who had it all. King Solomon, I'm going to be saying in a sermon on Sunday, is really a major Old Testament person. He not only built the temple for God, elaborate, expensive, beautiful, but he also wrote Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, lots of different things. He edited the Psalms to be able to put into one book. He's a major Old Testament person. He was a great guy, but he started to kind of turn away from God. And one of the things we see in Solomon is just, and we'll see this a couple times in the next couple weeks, just the slow turning away from God, just the drifting away from God that happens so often in Old Testament people's lives and in people's life today. One of the things as a pastor that I've seen over the last while is people during COVID just started changing their habits. Some of them just kind of quit coming to church because of course we couldn't. Some of them didn't view church online like we've had it, and sometimes people have just drifted away. I think there's a tremendous hungering for God that developed during the pandemic, and yet I've seen in other instances with people I know and I've heard from other pastors how people have just kind of drifted away. Heard from one, people developed different habits during the pandemic. And one of the habits was not going to church. And so sometimes after the pandemic, people have continued that. Their drift away from at least church. Maybe they have a vibrant faith and maybe they're doing Bible study and praying and everything. But the drift away from keeping close to God is something that's bothersome to me as a pastor. I've seen it. I don't know if you have too, but it's something that's concerning, that drift away. Solomon did that toward the middle end of his life, and it's something we can see in his life that I'll talk about in the sermon on Sunday, something that we can avoid. Chapter 13, the king who had it all, had, past tense, David's son Solomon. So Solomon was David's son. He becomes king after King David dies. Solomon is known for building the glorious temple in Jerusalem and also for his wisdom, which is a gift from God. Many of the Psalms are attributed to David, but the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon are all attributed to Solomon himself. We're going to talk about Proverbs on Sunday morning at the Adult Forum, and also a little bit in There's More to the Story on Monday. God used King David's skill as a warrior to lead Israel successfully against their enemies. And for 40 years, King David protected the nation and established her firmly in the promised land. On David's death, King Solomon became the king of Israel. And Solomon's reign over the kingdom of Israel began with a series of defining events. Solomon married, the daughter of the Egyptian Pharaoh. And ironically, Egypt, the nation that once enslaved Israel, now seeks the good graces of God's people because Solomon married the daughter of the Egyptian Pharaoh. God appeared to Solomon in a dream and offered to say, "Whatever you want, Solomon, I will give to you." And Solomon said, What I really want is wisdom to lead, a discerning mind to be able to lead your people. God said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll give you wisdom, but also give you riches and wealth and honor. But his wisdom at the beginning became the hallmark of his reign, and people from all over the whole known world at that time brought riches to Solomon and sat at his feet to learn about his teaching. During King Solomon's reign over the people of Israel, peace prevailed in the Promised Land. Solomon built the temple, and the construction project of that temple was massive. The end result was a majestic temple in Jerusalem. That will become significant in a couple weeks when Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem and destroys the temple. And Nebuchadnezzar took many of the wonderful things that Solomon had put in the temple and took that and brought it into Babylon, into the Babylonian Empire, stole all of those riches that Solomon had put into the temple. So King Solomon, in the beginning part of his life, experienced phenomenal success. His wisdom, his wealth was legendary. His reign was marked with peace and prosperity. The problem is that Solomon, about halfway through his life, started turning away from God. He started marrying hundreds of women, 300 women, 700 concubines. Many of them were foreigners. I'll talk about that in the sermon. And those concubines and multiple wives started turning his heart away from God. So Solomon's story begins with great promise, incomparable wisdom, magnificent achievement, but the closing chapters of his life were marked with apostasy and turning away from God. In the latter part of his life, the kingdom of Israel is torn in two, and Solomon, who had everything, a king who had it all, he had everything going for him, and at the end of his life, it crumbles in a heap of rubble around him. His legacy was tarnished with disobedience and idolatry. It's a sad story of Solomon, and yet it's something that's so important to be in the Bible for us to know about and for us to avoid. It's important to keep faithful, to keep your eyes on God, not to be distracted. We have so many distractions in our lives that seek to draw us away from God. There's so much noise in our world that keeps us from focusing on God. And one of the things I'm hoping as we go through the story of the Bible is to keep your eyes on God's love for you. Not to let all the other stuff that we hear come in and pollute our hearts and minds and draw them away from God, because that's what happened to Solomon, and his life crumbled around him. He started out so good, but he started turning away from God slowly. We'll see that in the next couple weeks too, about how people were close to God and all of a sudden slowly they started turning away from God. So while I think it's important to learn from good examples, I think it's also really important for us to learn from bad examples and to decide for ourselves, we don't want that happening to us. We don't want to have, whatever age we are, whether you're young or whether you're a little bit older, we don't want to have our lives and our legacy marked with turning away from God. Keep faithful, keep listening, keep coming to church, keep praying, keep reading the Bible or reading the story. Follow your way through so that you understand God's great upper story of God's love for us. Even with our wandering ways, God keeps coming after us and wants a relationship with us that's real and personal. So I hope you enjoy chapter 13, the good parts of it, and look at some of the proverbs that are listed in there. Wonderful things that we'll hear about in the adult forum and on Monday when there's more to the story. Take care, and until I see you again, just take care. Keep close to God. Take care. Bye-bye.